my son and his wife asserted I was never his actual dad, and compelled a genetic test to take away my fortune. Yet as the physician unveiled the findings, my son's complexion went ghastly pale. The shocking DNA match, however, was not my own. You know, I never thought I'd be sitting here telling you this, but what if your own son, your flesh and blood, demanded a DNA test just to prove you weren't worthy of what his mother left behind? That day, I learned betrayal has a face, and it was looking right at me, smirk and all. My name is Martin Lawson, and at 68, I'd spent 40 years building bridges, literally. 2 years ago, my beautiful Eleanor passed away after a long battle with cancer, and not a single day goes by that I don't reach for her side of the bed, only to remember she's gone. She was the love of my life, the rock of our family. Or so I thought. The evening it all began, I drove to my son Lucas's house for what I expected to be a simple family dinner. The autumn air was crisp, just as Eleanor always loved, and I found myself whispering to the empty passenger seat, "Wish me luck, love." I had no idea how much I'd need it. Vanessa, Lucas's wife, opened the door. Her smile was bright, almost too bright, but her eyes, they were calculating. "Martin," she said, "not Dad," as she used to when she wanted something. "Come in. We've set up a special spot for you." Special spot turned out to be a small folding table, several feet from the main dining table where Lucas and Vanessa would sit. One placemat, one set of silverware, a glass of water already poured. Like the kids' table at Thanksgiving, but I was the only kid. "It's for your comfort," Vanessa explained, gesturing vaguely. "You mentioned your back was bothering you last month. This chair has better support." I hadn't mentioned any such thing, but I just nodded and took my seat. Lucas emerged from the kitchen, and when our eyes met, I saw something I hadn't seen before. Guilt? Or maybe just the hollow stare of a man who'd stopped thinking for himself. "Hey, Dad," he mumbled. "Glad you could make it." We ate in near silence for the first 10 minutes. I complimented the food, though I could clearly see the takeout containers in the recycling bin. Vanessa just accepted the praise, smug. Lucas pushed his vegetables around his plate like a teenager avoiding homework. Then Vanessa set down her fork with deliberate, chilling precision. "Martin," she began, her voice suddenly harder, all business. "We need to discuss something important. With Eleanor's estate still in probate, Lucas and I have been thinking about the future, our future." My hands tightened around my water glass. I knew where this was going, but I wasn't prepared for the blunt force of her next words. "We need a DNA test," she announced, "to confirm you're really Lucas's biological father before any inheritance decisions are made." It hit me like a physical blow. 42 years. 42 years of raising that boy, of school plays and baseball games, late-night talks about girls and careers. And now this. I kept my face neutral, but inside, a storm was raging. "Vanessa," I said slowly, trying to keep my voice steady. "Why would you ask such a thing?" She leaned forward, her eyes never leaving mine. "Because Lucas deserves to know the truth. And frankly, we've heard certain rumors over the years, things that make us wonder." I turned to my son, my heart aching. "Lucas, do you believe this?" He couldn't meet my gaze. "Dad, it's just a formality. You shouldn't be afraid if you have nothing to hide. Vanessa says that real fathers don't run from simple tests." Real fathers. The phrase echoed in my mind like a stone dropped into a still, deep well. I taught this boy to ride a bike. I walked him down the aisle at his wedding. I held his hand at his mother's funeral, while he sobbed into my shoulder. Real fathers. My phone rang then, a small mercy. Linda Monroe's name flashed on the screen. "Excuse me," I said, rising from my cramped little table. "I need to take this." Vanessa's sigh was theatrical. "Always running away from hard conversations," she muttered. I stepped onto the back porch, but I barely heard Linda's cheerful voice. Through the window, I watched Vanessa pull a document from her purse and slide it across the table toward my empty seat. When I returned, the paper sat there, waiting for me like a coiled snake. A consent form for DNA testing, already filled out except for my signature. Vanessa smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Sign this by Friday, Martin. Otherwise, we'll have to assume you're hiding something that disqualifies you from Eleanor's estate entirely." I looked at the document, then at my son, who still wouldn't meet my eyes. Then at the woman who had somehow convinced him that his own father was a stranger. "I'll think about it," I said quietly. But as I drove home that night, my hands trembling on the steering wheel, I realized I wasn't just thinking about a DNA test. I was thinking about Eleanor, and the sealed envelope she had left in her keepsake box, the one marked with words I had never fully understood until now, to be opened only if they ever questioned your place in this family. The house was dark and silent when I pulled into the driveway. Eleanor used to leave the porch light on for me, a small beacon of warmth. Now, there was just a lonely street lamp. I sat in the car for a long time, the consent form on the passenger seat almost glowing in the darkness. Her sharp voice still echoed in my ears, demanding proof of something I had never once questioned in 42 years of fatherhood. When I finally went inside, the silence wrapped around me like a heavy, familiar cloak. I made my way to the living room. Eleanor's wedding portrait hung above the fireplace, faintly illuminated by moonlight. "What should I do, Eleanor?" I whispered to the empty room. And then, as clearly as if she were standing beside me, I heard her voice from those final days in the hospital. Her hand had been so thin in mine, her breathing labored, but her words were precise, urgent. "Martin, if anything ever happens, trust Grace Whitford completely. She knows everything about our family, everything." At the time, I thought she meant the will. Now I wondered if she meant something else entirely. I went to our bedroom, to the closet where I kept her things exactly as she'd left them. On the top shelf, behind her hatboxes, sat the mahogany keepsake box I'd given her on our 20th anniversary. I brought it down carefully. Inside were the treasures of our life together, a dried flower from her bridal bouquet, my old love letters, Lucas's first baby tooth. And there, at the bottom, was the envelope. I'd seen it before, but never thought much about it. Now I read the words written in her careful handwriting on the front, and my blood ran cold. To be opened only if they ever questioned your place in this family. She had known. Somehow, impossibly, Eleanor had known this day would come. She had prepared for it, left this envelope like a time capsule. My fingers trembled as I held it up to the light, trying to see through the paper, trying to glimpse whatever truth lay inside. But I couldn't bring myself to open it. A memory surfaced then, unbidden. Eleanor, at 30, standing in our kitchen, holding a small boy with dark, curly hair and eyes too old for his 4 years. Lucas. He'd been crying when he arrived, terrified and confused. But Eleanor had soothed him, her voice like honey, her promises like steel. "He's ours now," she'd said, looking at me over his head. "Forever. Don't let anyone ever tell you otherwise." I had promised her that day. I had sworn I would protect this boy, be his father in every way that mattered. And I had kept that promise for 38 years. Tears streamed down my face. I wasn't ready. Whatever Eleanor had hidden in there, I couldn't face it tonight. A desperate part of me still hoped Lucas would call, apologetic and ashamed. I closed the keepsake box and returned it to the closet. Sleep almost claimed me when my phone buzzed. An email notification. Unusual at this hour. I almost ignored it, but something made me reach for it. The sender, Grace Whitford, attorney at law. I sat up, suddenly wide awake. The words were brief, but they burned themselves into my memory. "Martin, I apologize for the late hour, but this cannot wait. Eleanor left specific instructions that I must share with you before any DNA test takes place. There are things you need to know. Things she made me promise to reveal only under certain circumstances. Those circumstances have now arrived. Come to my office tomorrow morning at 9. Tell no one, especially not Lucas or his wife. Eleanor was very clear about that. This is urgent." I read the email 3 times, my heart pounding. Eleanor had prepared for this. She had seen it coming. And in whatever secret she'd left with Grace Whitford, I was about to discover it. I didn't sleep that night. Eleanor's instructions. Eleanor prepared for this. But for what, exactly? And how had she known? By morning, my eyes burned from exhaustion. I was at the kitchen window, watching the sunrise, when I heard a car pull into the driveway. For one hopeful moment, I thought it might be Lucas, coming to apologize. But when I opened the front door, the look on his face told me hope was a luxury I could no longer afford. He stood on the porch, hands shoved deep in his pockets, shoulders hunched as if bracing against the cold wind that didn't exist. He looked older than his 42 years, worn down by something I couldn't name. "Can I come in?" he asked, not meeting my eyes. I stepped aside. We sat in the living room, him on the edge of the couch, me in my worn armchair. The distance between us felt like miles. Lucas stared at the floor, at the walls, anywhere but my face. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the hollow echo of words that weren't his own. "Dad, I need you to understand where Vanessa is coming from. She's just worried about protecting our fair share. Mom left a lot of assets, and with the estate still being sorted out, Vanessa thinks we need to make sure everything is legally clear. She says it's nothing personal." Nothing personal. The phrase hung in the air between us like smoke. "Lucas," I said quietly, "do you doubt me, son?" He flinched, as if I had struck him. His eyes darted toward mine for just a fraction of a second before skittering away. His jaw tightened. I watched him struggle, some battle between the boy I had raised and the man his wife had shaped. "It's not about doubt," he finally managed. "It's about documentation. Vanessa says that in legal matters, feelings don't count. Only paperwork. And what do you say, Lucas? What does my son say? He didn't answer. The silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating, until he abruptly changed the subject. Look, Vanessa found some old papers in Mom's things when we were helping sort through the house last month. She thinks you might be hiding something important, something that affects the inheritance. She just wants transparency. My blood turned to ice. Vanessa went through your mother's belongings? Lucas shifted uncomfortably. She was helping organize. You know how much stuff Mom kept. Someone had to go through it eventually. But I knew Eleanor. I knew how meticulously she maintained her privacy. The idea of Vanessa rifling through her papers, searching for ammunition, made my stomach turn. What exactly did she find? I asked, keeping my voice steady. I don't know the details. She just said there were some things that didn't add up. Things that made her wonder about the family history. He stood abruptly, clearly eager to escape. I have to go. Just think about signing the consent form, okay? It would make everything easier for everyone. I walked him to the door. As he stepped onto the porch, I reached out to embrace him, as I had done every time we parted for 42 years. But Lucas pulled back, mumbling something about being late, and hurried to his car without looking back. I stood in the doorway, watching him drive away. My arms empty. My heart heavier than it had ever been. That woman has poisoned him. I turned to find Linda Monroe standing at the edge of her property, a gardening trowel in one hand, concern etched across her weathered face. She had been Eleanor's closest friend, and since her passing, she had appointed herself my unofficial guardian. Linda, I said, my voice rough. She crossed the lawn and stood beside me. I saw the whole thing, Martin. The way he couldn't look at you. The way he pulled away. That's not the boy Eleanor raised. That's a man being controlled by someone who doesn't have his best interests at heart. What am I supposed to do? The question came out broken, desperate. Linda placed a gentle hand on my arm. You fight. You remember who you are and what you've built with that boy. And you trust that truth always finds its way home, no matter how many lies try to bury it. Before I could respond, my phone rang. Grace Whitford. I need to take this, I told Linda. She nodded, squeezing my arm before returning to her garden. Grace, I answered, stepping inside and closing the door. Martin, I'm glad I caught you. Her voice was serious, measured, the voice of a lawyer preparing to deliver difficult news. I've been going through Eleanor's files this morning, preparing for our meeting. I have to tell you something. I'm listening. Your wife was the most careful person I've ever known. In 30 years of practicing law, I've never met anyone who planned as thoroughly as Eleanor did. She always had a backup plan, Martin. Always. For everything. I thought of the envelope in the keepsake box, the one I had been too afraid to open. What are you telling me, Grace? There was a pause, and when she spoke again, her voice dropped lower, more urgent. I'm telling you that Eleanor left more than a will. She left evidence, Martin. Documentation of things she suspected might happen after she was gone. And she left a warning. Another pause. Come to my office this afternoon. Come alone. And whatever you do, don't mention this conversation to anyone, especially not to Lucas or his wife. The line went dead, and I stood in my silent house, holding a phone that suddenly felt like a lifeline. Eleanor had known. She had seen this coming, perhaps even known who would betray me and how. Somewhere in Grace Whitford's office, the truth was waiting for me. Grace Whitford's office occupied the 3rd floor of a red brick building downtown, the kind of place where old money came to be counted and protected. I arrived 30 minutes early, my nerves too frayed to sit at home. I paced the hallway, heart hammering. When Lucas and Vanessa stepped off the elevator at precisely 9 o'clock, I realized with a sinking feeling that this would not be the private meeting Grace had promised. We received a notice about a formal will reading, Vanessa announced by way of greeting. She wore a cream-colored suit that probably cost more than my first car, her jewelry glittering. Apparently, there are additional documents that weren't included in the initial probate filing. Lucas stood behind her like a shadow, his eyes meeting mine briefly before sliding away. Grace appeared in her doorway, her expression unreadable. Please come in, she said, gesturing toward 3 chairs arranged before her massive oak desk. We have much to discuss. Vanessa claimed the center seat like a queen settling onto her throne. I took the chair furthest from her, Lucas filling the space between us, a human buffer zone. Grace settled behind her desk, opening a leather folder with deliberate slowness. Before we begin, I want to be clear that everything discussed in this room is legally binding and will be entered into the official probate record. Mrs. Eleanor Lawson was very specific about the conditions under which certain documents should be revealed. Vanessa leaned forward slightly. Of course. We're here for full transparency. The irony was not lost on me. Grace began reading. She listed Eleanor's assets methodically, her voice neutral. The house, the savings, the investment portfolio Eleanor had built over decades. With each item, I watched Vanessa's eyes grow brighter, her posture more alert, like a predator sensing wounded prey. Now we come to the distribution clauses, Grace continued, adjusting her reading glasses. Article 7, Section A. In the event that any dispute arises regarding bloodline or biological relationship within the Lawson family, such dispute must be verified through legal DNA testing conducted by a court-approved facility. Vanessa's smile spread across her face like sunrise over poisoned ground. She turned to me, triumph gleaming in her eyes. See? Even Eleanor knew this needed to be settled properly. She wanted the same transparency we're asking for. I said nothing. Something in Grace's expression told me to wait. However, Grace continued, her voice sharpening almost imperceptibly. Article 7, Section B states the following. Any party who initiates legal action, formal proceedings, or documented demands to challenge Martin Lawson's paternal rights, or his position within this family, shall automatically and irrevocably forfeit all claims to the Eleanor Lawson estate. This includes, but is not limited to, cash assets, property investments, and personal effects. Vanessa's smile froze. Her face strained of color. That's absurd, she sputtered after a moment of stunned silence. We're not challenging anything. We're just asking reasonable questions about family history. Grace removed her glasses and looked directly at Vanessa with the patience of someone who had spent decades dealing with people who thought they were cleverer than the law. Mrs. Lawson, the consent form you presented to Martin 3 days ago specifically requested DNA testing to, and I quote, confirm biological paternity before inheritance distribution. That constitutes a formal, documented demand, challenging his paternal status. She held up a photocopy of the very document Vanessa had slid across the dinner table. Eleanor anticipated exactly this situation. She wrote these clauses herself, reviewed them with me multiple times, and had them witnessed by 2 independent parties. Vanessa's face was pale beneath her expensive makeup. Lucas sat rigid beside her, staring at his hands. This can't be legal, Vanessa insisted, her voice rising. You can't disinherit someone for asking questions. I assure you it is entirely legal, Grace replied calmly. Eleanor was meticulous about ensuring every clause would hold up in court. She consulted 3 separate attorneys before finalizing this document. The room fell silent except for the ticking of an antique clock. I watched Vanessa struggle to regain her composure, her mind clearly racing to find some loophole, some escape from the trap she had unknowingly walked into. Grace closed the leather folder and folded her hands on top of it. There is one more matter, she said, and something in her tone made everyone sit up straighter. Eleanor left a sealed envelope in my care, separate from the will. She gave explicit instructions that it should only be opened if this exact situation occurred, if someone formally challenged Martin's place in the family. She reached into her desk drawer and withdrew a cream-colored envelope, aged but intact, with Eleanor's handwriting visible on the front. This envelope contains the truth about Lucas's origins. Eleanor wanted Martin to know everything before any DNA test takes place. Grace looked at me, her eyes soft with compassion. She said you would understand once you read it. She said it would explain everything. The envelope from Eleanor remained unopened in my coat pocket as we drove to the DNA clinic 3 days later. Grace had offered to let me read it privately, but Vanessa had insisted we proceed with the testing first, claiming she wanted everything done in the proper legal order. I suspected she simply wanted to deny me any advantage, any preparation for whatever truth Eleanor had hidden away. Dr. Samuel Green's clinic was all glass and chrome and sterile efficiency. The waiting room smelled of antiseptic and anxiety. I took a seat near the window while Lucas filled out paperwork, Vanessa hovering over his shoulder, pointing at lines as if he were a child. She had been insufferable all morning. Now, she paced like a caged animal, her heels clicking. You're not having second thoughts, are you? She asked, stopping in front of my chair. Because backing out now would look very suspicious. I agreed to the test, I said quietly. I'm here. Good. She didn't move. I just want you to know that whatever happens, Lucas and I only want the truth. That's all anyone wants, really. The truth. An elderly woman beside me glanced up from her magazine, her brow furrowed. Vanessa noticed the attention and seemed to feed on it. She raised her voice slightly, clearly performing for the room. You know how it is with old people. They always have secrets, things they've buried for decades. That's why they're so terrified of tests like this. Science has a way of exposing what people want to keep hidden. The elderly woman set down her magazine. Excuse me, she said sharply. But that's a horrible thing to say to anyone, let alone a man who appears to be your father-in-law. Vanessa's smile tightened. This is a private family matter. Then perhaps you should discuss it privately instead of humiliating him in public. I placed a gentle hand on the woman's arm. It's all right. Thank you for your kindness. Before Vanessa could respond, a nurse appeared. Martin Lawson. Dr. Green will see you now. Alone, please. I rose, grateful for the escape. Dr. Green's private office was smaller than I expected. He stood to shake my hand, but there was something hesitant in his manner. Mr. Lawson, please sit down. Before we proceed with the testing, there's something I need to discuss with you. I sat, my heart beginning to pound. He turned his monitor away from my view and typed. Your wife, Eleanor Lawson, she was a patient here some years ago. I didn't know that, I admitted. She never mentioned this clinic. Dr. Green nodded slowly. That's understandable. The records are quite old, and she requested strict confidentiality at the time. He paused. Mr. Lawson, there's something unusual in her file. Another name is listed alongside hers in connection with certain tests that were conducted. My mouth went dry. What name? He hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. A man named Michael Rowan. I cannot tell you more than that due to confidentiality laws. But given the current situation with your family, I felt you should at least know this much. Michael Rowan. The name meant nothing to me, yet it landed like a physical blow. Who was this man? Why had Eleanor come to a DNA clinic with someone I had never heard of? In all our years, she had never mentioned anyone by that name. I don't understand, I managed. Eleanor and I were married for 44 years. She never kept secrets from me. Dr. Green's expression softened with sympathy. Mr. Lawson, I've learned in this profession that everyone has chapters of their life they don't share, even with those closest to them. I would suggest you speak with your attorney. If Eleanor left any documentation explaining this, that would be the place to find it. He stood, signaling the end of our private conversation. But as I rose, he placed a hand on my shoulder and leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. The DNA results will take 3 days to process. But I must tell you something, Mr. Lawson. What Eleanor left in her file here, the instructions she gave us, the information she wanted preserved. It will change everything you think you know about your wife, about your son, about your entire family. I walked back to the waiting room in a daze, Eleanor's sealed envelope burning against my chest like a coal. Who was Michael Rowan? And what secrets had my wife taken to her grave? The name Michael Rowan haunted me through 2 sleepless nights. I searched for him, desperate, clumsy, typing variations of his name into every database I could access. Each search felt like a betrayal. On the second night, I finally found him. Michael Rowan had been a law student at Eleanor's university, graduating 2 years before her. Photos showed a tall man with serious eyes, standing in group shots. In one, dated 39 years ago, he stood beside Eleanor at a graduation ceremony. They weren't touching, but something about the way she looked at him made my stomach clench. Had my wife loved another man before me? Had she loved him during our marriage? The questions circled my mind like vultures. I couldn't bear it any longer. The sealed envelope had grown heavier with each passing hour. Now I retrieved it with trembling hands and sat at the kitchen table, where Eleanor and I had shared thousands of meals, raised a child, planned a future she wouldn't live to see completed. The paper tore easily. Inside I found a single photograph and a handwritten letter. The photograph showed a small boy with dark, curly hair, clutching a stuffed rabbit I recognized immediately. Lucas. He couldn't have been more than 4, his face tear-streaked but hopeful. Eleanor's letter was written in the careful script she reserved for matters of the heart. My dearest Martin, it began. If you are reading this, then someone has questioned your right to be Lucas's father. I always feared this day might come, which is why I prepared this letter so many years ago. Lucas came to us as a gift from my dear friend Sarah, who couldn't stay with us. She was dying, Martin, and she had no family, no one to care for the child she loved more than life itself. She asked me to raise him, to give him the home and the father she knew he deserved. Michael Rowan was the attorney who helped us make it legal, who ensured that Lucas would be ours in every way the law recognized. I never told you the full story because I wanted Lucas to feel that he had always been ours. That there was never a moment when he was anything other than our son. Sarah made me promise to love him as my own. And I have. You have. We chose him, Martin, and that choice made him ours more completely than biology ever could. Love him as your own, because he is your own. Blood does not make a father. Years of sacrifice and patience and unconditional love make a father. You are Lucas's father in every way that matters. I have always protected this family. Even after I am gone, I will continue to protect it. Trust Grace. She knows everything, and she will help you when the time comes. All my love forever, Eleanor. The letter fell from my hands. Tears streamed down my face. I wept. Not for the money Vanessa wanted to steal, not for the dignity she had tried to strip away, but for the boy I had raised, the son I might lose if he learned the truth from the wrong person. Lucas was adopted. He had never known. And now Vanessa was using this secret as a weapon against us both. I thought of Sarah, a woman I had never met, whose child I had loved for 38 years. I thought of Eleanor, carrying this secret alone, protecting Lucas and me from a truth she feared might hurt us. I thought of Michael Rowan, not a rival, but a guardian angel who had helped make our family legal and whole. Blood doesn't define family, I whispered to the empty kitchen. I raised him. I loved him. He is my son. My phone rang, shattering the silence. Grace Whitford. Martin, she said without preamble, her voice tight with urgency. I've been reviewing my office records, and I've discovered something disturbing. Vanessa visited my office 3 times in the months before Eleanor died. She claimed to be helping organize family documents, but my assistant remembers her asking very specific questions about sealed files and confidential records. My blood ran cold. What are you saying? I'm saying she was searching for something, Martin. And based on what she's done since Eleanor's death, I think she found it. She knew about the adoption before any of this started. She's been planning this attack for years. I didn't hear from Lucas for 2 days after Grace's phone call. I waited, checking for messages every hour. When he finally appeared at my door on the 3rd morning, he looked like a man who hadn't slept in weeks. We need to talk, he said, pushing past me into the living room without waiting for an invitation. His movements were jerky, agitated, nothing like the controlled shell of a man I had seen at Vanessa's side. I need you to tell me the truth, Dad. All of it. I closed the door slowly, buying myself time to think. What happened, Lucas? He laughed, but there was no humor in it. What happened? I'll tell you what happened. 2 nights ago, I came home early from work. Vanessa didn't hear me come in. She was in our bedroom, stuffing a folder into the back of her closet like it was something she needed to hide. He began pacing, running his hands through his hair, a gesture I remembered from his teenage years. When I asked her about it, she exploded. Started screaming about trust, about everything she's done for our family, about how I never appreciate her sacrifices. It was like watching a mask slip, Dad. Like seeing someone I'd never met before wearing my wife's face. Lucas, I began, but he held up his hand. Let me finish. After she went to sleep, I went back to that closet. I had to know what she was hiding, what was so important that she'd rather fight than explain. His voice cracked. I found a folder full of documents, old documents, and right there on top was a piece of paper I never knew existed. He stopped pacing and looked at me, eyes holding equal parts pain and accusation. My adoption certificate. Signed, sealed, legal, dated 38 years ago. I'm adopted, Dad. And she knew. Vanessa knew, and she never told me. The words hung in the air between us, heavy with decades of secrets, finally breaking free. I started thinking about everything. Lucas continued. All the little things that never quite added up. The way Vanessa always avoided talking about how she knew our family before we met. She mentioned once, early in our relationship, that she knew the Lawsons well. But when I asked what she meant, she changed the subject. I let it go because I was in love. Because I didn't want to question the best thing that had ever happened to me. He laughed bitterly at his own naivety. I confronted her this morning. Showed her the certificate. Demanded to know how long she'd known, why she'd kept it from me. His hands clenched into fists. She didn't even try to deny it. She went cold, Dad. Completely cold. Said she found out years ago that she was protecting me from the painful truth that you had lied to me my entire life. Lucas, I never lied to you. Your mother and I, we chose you. We loved you from the moment Sarah placed you in our arms. We didn't tell you because we wanted you to feel that you had always been ours, that nothing could ever change that. Sarah? He looked at me with confusion. Who is Sarah? Your birth mother. She was your mother's best friend. She was dying, and she had no one else. She asked Eleanor to raise you, to give you the family she couldn't provide. We adopted you legally, with love, and we never regretted it for a single day. Lucas's face crumpled, years of certainty collapsing into rubble. But before grief could fully take hold, anger flared in his eyes. I asked Vanessa how long she'd really known. Before our wedding, before we even started dating. His voice grew louder. She just smiled at me. That cold, calculating smile I've seen her use on business rivals. And you know what she said? I waited, my heart pounding. Lucas's voice broke completely now, tears streaming down his face. She said, "Why do you think I chose you? Like I was a business investment, Dad. Like our entire marriage was just a strategy to get to you and Mom's money." He met my eyes, and in them, I saw the final death of his innocence. The morning of the DNA results felt like walking toward an execution. I dressed in my best suit, the charcoal gray one Eleanor had picked out for me years ago, and drove to Dr. Green's clinic with a strange calm settling over my heart. I knew what the results would say. I had known since reading Eleanor's letter. The only question was how Lucas would receive the truth, and whether any part of our relationship could survive the revelation. Grace Whitford met me in the parking lot, her expression grave, but determined. "Are you ready for this?" she asked. "I've had 38 years to prepare," I replied. "I just never thought it would happen like this." We entered the clinic and found Vanessa already seated in Dr. Green's private conference room, her posture radiating triumph. She wore a crimson dress that made her look like a predator dressed for celebration, her smile sharp enough to cut glass. When she saw me, her eyes glittered with barely concealed victory. "Martin," she said sweetly, "I was beginning to think you might not show up. Cold feet, perhaps?" I took my seat without responding. Grace settled beside me, her briefcase resting on her lap like a shield. Lucas arrived last. When he walked through the door, I barely recognized him. His face was haggard, his eyes hollow, his movements carrying the weight of a man whose entire world had collapsed. He didn't look at Vanessa. He didn't look at anyone. He simply stared at the table as if the wood grain held answers to questions he couldn't bring himself to ask. Vanessa frowned at his demeanor, but said nothing. She was too focused on her impending victory to notice that her husband had already begun to slip away from her. Dr. Green entered with a manila folder in his hands and closed the door behind him. The click of the latch sounded impossibly loud. "Thank you all for coming," he said, taking his place at the head of the table. "I have the results of the DNA paternity test conducted on Martin Lawson and Lucas Lawson." Vanessa leaned forward, her fingers interlaced on the table, her smile widening. Dr. Green opened the folder and read in a clinical monotone. "According to the genetic analysis performed by our laboratory and verified by an independent facility, Martin Lawson and Lucas Lawson share no biological DNA markers consistent with a parent-child relationship." Vanessa's reaction was immediate and theatrical. She threw her hands up in triumph, her voice ringing through the room like a bell announcing victory. "I knew it! I told everyone from the beginning, he's not the real father. This whole inheritance claim is built on a lie." She turned to Lucas, reaching for his arm with false sympathy. "Honey, I'm so sorry you had to find out this way, but at least now we know the truth. Your mother had an affair, and Martin has been pretending all these years. We finally have proof." The room waited for chaos. For shouting, for denials, for the explosive confrontation Vanessa clearly expected. Instead, I stood slowly from my chair and buttoned my jacket with steady hands. "I know," I said, my voice calm and clear. "I have always known." Vanessa's smile froze. "What?" "Lucas is my son by choice, not by blood." I looked at my boy, at the shattered man sitting across from me, who had been manipulated by his wife for over a decade. Eleanor and I adopted him when he was 4 years old, after his birth mother passed away. Her name was Sarah, and she was Eleanor's dearest friend. She was dying and had no family to care for her child. She asked us to raise him, to love him, to give him the life she could not provide. The silence that followed was absolute. We never told Lucas because we didn't want him to feel different. We didn't want him to carry the weight of that knowledge when it changed nothing about how much we loved him. He was ours from the moment we held him. Biology had nothing to do with it. I turned to address the room, my gaze settling briefly on Vanessa's stricken face. "And for those wondering about Michael Rowan, the name that appeared in Eleanor's medical records. He was the attorney who helped us process the adoption. He was a friend from Eleanor's college days who specialized in family law. There was no affair. There was no betrayal. There was only a dying woman's wish, and 2 people who loved a child enough to make him their own." Lucas finally looked up, tears streaming down his face. His voice came out broken, barely above a whisper. "You chose me?" I walked around the table and knelt beside his chair, taking his hands in mine, the way I had done when he was small and frightened of thunderstorms. "We chose you, Lucas. Your mother and I chose you the day Sarah placed you in our arms, and we would choose you again every single day for the rest of our lives. You are my son. No test, no document, no scheming woman can ever change that." Lucas broke down completely, sobbing into my shoulder while Vanessa sat frozen in her chair, her victory crumbling to ash around her. Dr. Green cleared his throat softly. "There is one more matter I need to address." We all turned to him, even Lucas, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. "Mrs. Eleanor Lawson visited this clinic 5 years ago and left something in my care. A video testimony recorded and witnessed, with specific instructions about when it should be revealed." He looked at Grace, then at me. "She specified that it should only be played if this exact situation occurred, If someone formally challenged Martin's paternal rights and demanded DNA evidence. He paused, his expression solemn. She said the video would explain everything. Attorney Whitford, I believe you have the original copy in your possession. Mrs. Lawson wanted it played for the family immediately following the DNA results. Grace nodded and opened her briefcase, withdrawing a small USB drive. Eleanor recorded this message when she first learned her cancer was terminal. Grace said quietly. She knew this day might come, and she wanted to speak for herself when it did. Grace connected the USB drive to Dr. Green's laptop, and he turned the monitor so everyone in the room could see. The screen flickered briefly before an image appeared that stole the breath from my lungs. Eleanor sat in our living room, in the armchair by the window, where she had spent so many afternoons reading. The video had been recorded in autumn, and she wore the blue cardigan I'd given her for our 40th anniversary. She was thinner than I remembered, the cancer already beginning its cruel work, but her eyes were clear and sharp. When she spoke, her voice filled the room like a ghost returning home. My name is Eleanor Lawson, and I'm recording this message of my own free will on October 15th, 5 years ago today. She paused, folding her hands in her lap with the quiet dignity that had defined her entire life. If you are watching this, then something has happened that I hoped would never come to pass. Someone has questioned Martin's right to be Lucas's father. Someone has tried to use our family's most precious secret as a weapon. I heard Lucas draw a sharp breath beside me. I reached for his hand and held it tightly. Eleanor continued, her gaze steady and unwavering. I need to tell you a story about love and loss, and the choices we make when there are no good options left. 42 years ago, my dearest friend Sarah came to me with news that would change all of our lives. She was dying. The doctors had given her less than a year, and she had a 4-year-old son with no father, no family, no one to care for him after she was gone. Her voice softened, heavy with old grief. Sarah was the kindest person I have ever known. She loved her son more than anything, and her greatest fear was not death itself, but leaving him alone. She asked me if Martin and I would raise him, if we would give him the home and the father she knew he deserved. She made me promise to love him as my own, and I gave her that promise without hesitation. Eleanor's eyes glistened, but she didn't cry. We adopted Lucas legally with the help of our friend Michael Rowan, an attorney who specialized in family cases. We brought him home and made him ours in every way that mattered. We never told him the truth because we wanted him to feel that he had always belonged, that there was never a moment when he was anything other than our son. Perhaps that was wrong. Perhaps we should have told him when he was old enough to understand. But we made our choice out of love, and I stand by it even now. She leaned forward slightly, and her expression changed. The softness faded, replaced by something harder, more resolute. When she spoke again, her voice carried an edge I had rarely heard from her in life. I have always feared that someone might discover this truth and try to use it against my family. Someone who sees relationships as transactions. Who measures love in dollars and inheritance clauses. Someone who married into our family, not for Lucas's heart, but for access to what Martin and I have built over a lifetime of hard work. Eleanor's eyes seemed to bore directly through the screen, and I saw Vanessa flinch as if struck. I'm not a fool. I've watched. I've noticed the questions about our finances, the sudden interest in estate planning, the subtle ways certain people have tried to separate my son from his father. I have seen the manipulation, the isolation, the careful dismantling of trust that happens when a predator identifies its prey. The room had gone completely still. Even Dr. Green seemed frozen, caught in the spell of a dead woman's testimony. So I prepared. Eleanor continued. I documented everything. I created safeguards that would activate only if someone tried to challenge Martin's place in this family. I left evidence with Grace Whitford, my attorney and my friend, with instructions to reveal it only when the time was right. She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice was gentle once more, filled with the warmth I remembered so well. Lucas, my darling boy, if you are watching this, please know that you were wanted. You were chosen. Your father and I loved you from the first moment we held you. And that love has never wavered for a single day. Blood does not make a family. Choice does. Sacrifice does. Showing up every day and putting someone else's needs before your own does. Martin is your father in every way that matters, and nothing anyone says can change that. Lucas was sobbing openly now, his body shaking with grief and relief and the overwhelming weight of 38 years of hidden truth. I pulled him close, letting him cry against my shoulder. You are my son. I whispered into his hair. Nothing changes that. Nothing ever could. On the screen, Eleanor's expression hardened one final time. She looked directly into the camera with the fierce protectiveness of a mother defending her family from beyond the grave. And to whoever is trying to hurt my family, whoever orchestrated this attack on my husband and my son, I want you to know something. Her voice dropped to a whisper, but every word carried the weight of absolute certainty. I know who you are. I have been watching you for years, and I have been preparing for this exact moment. She smiled then, a cold smile I had never seen on her face in life. Grace has everything. Every document, every record, every piece of evidence I gathered. And when she reveals what I left behind, you will understand that you made a terrible mistake when you chose to target my family. The screen went black. The silence that followed was deafening. I looked across the room at Vanessa, who stood frozen in the corner. Her face pale as death. Her triumphant smile long since crumbled to dust. Eleanor had known. She had always known. And even from beyond the grave, she was still protecting us. The conference room erupted into chaos. The moment Eleanor's video ended, Lucas pulled away from my embrace and turned on Vanessa with a fury I had never seen in him before. His face was streaked with tears, but his eyes burned with the fire of a man who had finally seen the truth he had been blind to for over a decade. You knew, he said, his voice low and dangerous. You knew I was adopted before we ever got married. That's why you chose me, isn't it? Not because you loved me, but because you saw an opportunity to get to my father's money. Vanessa raised her hands in a gesture of innocence that might have been convincing years ago. Lucas, darling, you're upset. You're not thinking clearly. Yes, I found out about the adoption, but that doesn't change how I feel about you. I fell in love with you, not some inheritance. Stop lying. Lucas slammed his fist on the table. I've spent 10 years listening to your lies, and I'm done. I remember everything now. Every little comment, every suggestion, every time you push me to claim what's rightfully ours. You've been playing me from the beginning. He began pacing, his words tumbling out like water breaking through a dam. You always found reasons to keep me away from Dad. Every holiday, every birthday, there was always some excuse why we couldn't visit or why he shouldn't come to our house. You said he was too controlling, too old-fashioned, too attached to the past. But it was never about him, was it? It was about keeping me isolated so you could fill my head with your poison. Vanessa's mask was slipping, her composure cracking. Everything I did was for us, Lucas. For our future. Our future? He laughed bitterly. You mean your future? You were always asking about the estate, always wanting to know exactly what Mom and Dad owned, always pushing me to talk to lawyers about inheritance laws. I thought you were just being practical. I thought you were looking out for our family. His voice broke on the last word. But we were never a family to you, were we? We were just a means to an end. I watched my son unravel years of manipulation in a matter of minutes, each memory clicking into place like pieces of a puzzle he had refused to see. Part of me ached for him, for the pain of realizing the woman he loved had never loved him at all. But another part of me felt something I had not experienced in years: hope. Lucas stopped pacing and walked toward me, his steps uncertain, like a child taking his first steps after a long illness. Dad, he said, his voice cracked on the single syllable. I'm so sorry. I should have trusted you. All those years I took her side against you. All the dinners I missed, and phone calls I didn't return. You never stopped loving me. And I repaid you by believing her lies over your truth. I stood and opened my arms. For the first time in what felt like forever, my son walked into them without hesitation. You're still my son, I said, holding him tightly. That's all that matters. That's all that has ever mattered. We stood there for a long moment, two men trying to rebuild a bridge that had been deliberately burned by someone who was supposed to love them both. I felt his shoulders shake with silent sobs, and I held him tighter, willing him to understand that nothing he had done could ever make me stop loving him. When we finally separated, I noticed that Vanessa had disappeared from the room. Dr. Green gestured toward the hallway. She stepped out to make a phone call, said it was urgent. Grace and I exchanged glances. Nothing about Vanessa was ever innocent, especially not now. I excused myself and moved quietly toward the partially open door that led to the clinic's back corridor. Vanessa stood near the emergency exit, her phone pressed to her ear, her voice a harsh whisper that carried further than she realized. The plan failed. They know everything. The old woman left a video, can you believe it? She documented the whole adoption story and practically accused me on camera. A pause. No, we can't salvage this. We need to move to Plan B immediately. Start transferring what we can before they freeze the accounts. My blood ran cold. She was not just a manipulator. She was a thief, and she had an accomplice. Just do it, Vanessa snapped. I don't care about the risks anymore. If we don't move fast, we lose everything. She ended the call and stood for a moment with her back to me, her shoulders rising and falling with rapid breaths. I retreated silently before she could turn around, my mind racing with the implications of what I had just heard. Back in the conference room, Lucas sat with his head in his hands while Grace reviewed something on her phone. She looked up when I entered, and her expression told me that the situation had just become significantly worse. "Martin," she said quietly, pulling me aside. "I need to speak with you privately." We stepped into Dr. Green's office, and Grace closed the door behind us. "I found the proof Eleanor mentioned in her video," she said, her voice tight with controlled anger. "I've been going through the financial records she left in my care, and the evidence is damning. Vanessa has been stealing from Eleanor's accounts for the past 3 years. Small amounts at first, easily overlooked, but they added up. $87,000 total, siphoned through various transfers and cash withdrawals. I felt sick. Eleanor was dying. She was too weak to manage her own finances." "Exactly. Vanessa took advantage of that." Grace's jaw tightened. "But here's the worst part, Martin. She didn't act alone. The transfers were routed through a secondary account held by someone else. Someone who's been helping her orchestrate this entire scheme from the very beginning." Grace spread the bank records across Dr. Green's desk with the methodical precision of a prosecutor. Each page told a story of betrayal written in numbers and dates, a trail of theft that spanned the final months of Eleanor's life. "Look at this," Grace said, pointing to a series of highlighted transactions. Starting 6 months before Eleanor passed, regular withdrawals began appearing from her primary savings account. $2,000 here, $3,000 there, always just under the threshold that would trigger automatic bank alerts. Over the course of those 6 months, Vanessa withdrew a total of $87,000. I stared at the documents, feeling sick. Eleanor was in and out of the hospital during that time. She could barely manage her medication schedule, let alone monitor her bank accounts. Exactly. Vanessa knew that. She had access to Eleanor's financial information because Lucas had given her temporary power of attorney to help with household bills while you were both focused on caregiving. Grace's voice hardened. She abused that trust, systematically and deliberately. The door opened, and Lucas stepped inside, his face still blotchy from crying, but his eyes now sharp with determination. "I want to know everything," he said. "I'm done being kept in the dark." Grace nodded and gestured for him to join us at the desk. "You deserve to know, Lucas. This involves you more than anyone." She pulled out another document, this one older, with Eleanor's handwriting visible in the margins. "This is where it gets interesting," Grace continued. "Eleanor knew about the theft. She discovered it about 3 months before she died, when she noticed discrepancies in her account statements during a rare lucid period between treatments." Lucas frowned. "If she knew, why didn't she report it? Why didn't she tell anyone?" "Because your mother was playing a longer game." Grace's expression held a mixture of admiration and sadness. "Eleanor documented everything, every withdrawal, every transfer, every piece of evidence that proved Vanessa was stealing from her. But she didn't report it because she wanted to use it as leverage. She knew that confronting Vanessa directly would only result in denial and manipulation. So she waited." "Waited for what?" I asked, though part of me already knew the answer. "For Vanessa to trigger the trap herself." Grace held up Eleanor's handwritten notes. "Eleanor wrote this, she will not stop at theft. She married Lucas for access to our family, and she will eventually try to remove Martin from the equation entirely. When she makes her move, when she challenges his place in this family, everything I have gathered will be used against her. Let her think she is winning. Let her grow bold. The higher she climbs, the harder she will fall." The room fell silent as the full weight of Eleanor's strategy became clear. My wife had spent her dying months not just fighting cancer, but preparing a battlefield for a war she knew would come after she was gone. Grace pulled out one final document, and her expression grew even more serious. "There's something else. The money Vanessa stole wasn't deposited into her personal accounts. It was routed through a secondary account held by another person." She turned the page to reveal bank statements with a different name at the top, Patricia Hartwell. "Vanessa's mother." Lucas went pale. "Her mother? What does her mother have to do with this?" "Everything." Grace handed him a printed email chain that Eleanor had somehow obtained and preserved. "According to Eleanor's investigation, Patricia didn't just help launder the stolen money. She orchestrated the entire scheme from the very beginning." I watched my son read the emails, watched his face transform from confusion to horror to a devastation so complete it seemed to hollow him out from the inside. "These emails are from 12 years ago," he whispered. "Before Vanessa and I even met. Her mother is talking about loss in opportunity and positioning Vanessa for maximum access." He looked up, his eyes wild. "She introduced us at that charity gala. Her mother introduced us. She said it was coincidence that she just happened to know someone who knew my parents." Vanessa's voice cut through the room like a blade. None of us had heard her return, but she stood in the doorway now, her arms crossed, her expression no longer bothering to hide the coldness beneath. "So you finally figured it out," she said, her voice flat and unemotional. Congratulations. Lucas turned to face her, his hand shaking. Your mother set us up from the beginning. Our entire marriage was a con. Vanessa shrugged, a gesture so casual it bordered on contemptuous. She taught me to take what I deserve. The world doesn't give anything to women like us, Lucas. We have to take it. Your family had money, status. Everything my mother never had. She saw an opportunity, and she prepared me to seize it. And I almost had everything. She continued, her eyes flickering briefly with something that might have been regret, or might have been merely annoyance at being caught. If that old woman hadn't been so paranoid, if she just died quietly like she was supposed to, none of this would have come out. You would have lived your whole life believing I loved you, and I would have gotten exactly what I was owed. Lucas staggered backward as if she had physically struck him. I caught his arm, steadying him, feeling the tremor that ran through his entire body. Grace stepped forward, her voice carrying the weight of legal authority. Vanessa, I need you to listen very carefully to what I'm about to read. She opened Eleanor's will to a page marked with a red tab. Article 12, Section C. Any party who commits financial fraud, theft, or misappropriation against Eleanor Lawson or her estate, either during her lifetime or after her death, shall automatically and irrevocably forfeit all inheritance rights. Furthermore, all documented evidence of such fraud shall be immediately forwarded to the appropriate law enforcement authorities for criminal prosecution. Grace closed the folder and looked directly at Vanessa. Eleanor left instructions for me to contact the district attorney's office the moment I had sufficient evidence of your crimes. That call was made 20 minutes ago, while you were in the hallway plotting with your mother. She paused, letting the words sink in. Vanessa, you just lost everything. The inheritance, your freedom, and whatever scraps of dignity you thought you still possessed. Vanessa's composure shattered like glass hitting concrete. For a moment, she stood frozen, processing Grace's words, calculating her remaining options with the cold efficiency of a machine running out of power. Then her survival instincts kicked in, and she transformed before our eyes into something desperate and dangerous. You think you've won? She snarled, her elegance dissolving into raw fury. If you prosecute me, I'll destroy you. I'll tell everyone that Lucas was adopted, that your precious family legacy is built on lies. Every newspaper, every television station, every social media platform will know that Martin Lawson raised another man's child and tried to pass him off as his own. Your reputation will be ruined. I met her threat with a calm I did not know I possessed. Perhaps Eleanor's spirit was with me in that moment, lending me her strength. Everyone already knows, Vanessa. We told the truth today, in this room, with witnesses present. Lucas knows he was adopted. I know. Grace knows. Dr. Green knows. There is no scandal left for you to expose. No secret weapon hidden in your arsenal. We have nothing to hide anymore. Her face contorted with frustrated rage as she realized her primary leverage had evaporated. She spun toward Lucas, her tactics shifting from threat to manipulation, her voice suddenly soft and pleading. Lucas, baby, please, you have to understand. Everything I did was for us, for our future together. Yes, my mother helped me see the opportunity, but I grew to love you. I really did. We can still work this out. We can take whatever inheritance is left and start over somewhere new, just the two of us. She reached for his hands, her eyes filling with tears that might have been genuine, or might have been her final performance. Lucas pulled away as if her touch burned him. No, he said, his voice steady, despite the pain etched across his face. You didn't do this for us. You did it for yourself. I was never your husband. I was your tool, your access card, to a vault you'd been planning to rob since before you even knew my name. He took another step backward, putting distance between them that felt permanent. Our entire marriage was a lie. Every kiss, every promise, every time you said you loved me, all of it was calculated. Something broke inside Vanessa. The composed businesswoman, the sophisticated manipulator, the careful schemer who had spent years building her con fell away, and what remained was raw and ugly, and utterly uncontrolled. That old woman knew, she screamed, her voice echoing off the walls. She set me up from the beginning. She let me take that money, let me think I was getting away with it, just so she could trap me later. What kind of sick person does that? She was dying and she spent her last months building a cage for me instead of making peace with her family. Her chest heaved with ragged breaths as she continued her tirade, oblivious to the fact that every word was digging her grave deeper. I should have known something was wrong when she never questioned the withdrawals. $87,000. And she never said a word, never changed the will, never revoked my access. She wanted me to steal it. She wanted evidence she could use against me when the time came. Grace and I exchanged glances. Vanessa had just confessed to theft on the record, in front of multiple witnesses. But I noticed something else. Lucas had his phone in his hand, held low at his side. The screen faintly illuminated. He saw me looking and gave an almost imperceptible nod. He was recording everything. Later he would explain that he had started the recording the moment Vanessa returned to the room. Some instinct warning him that her reaction might prove useful. Our state allowed one-party consent for recordings, meaning that as a participant in the conversation, Lucas had every legal right to document what was being said. Vanessa's confession, her admission of theft, her acknowledgement that Eleanor had caught her, all of it was now preserved as admissible evidence. The sound of footsteps in the hallway announced what came next. 2 police officers appeared in the doorway, their expressions professional and impassive. Grace must have coordinated with them before confronting Vanessa, ensuring they would arrive at precisely the right moment. "Vanessa Lawson?" the older officer asked, though it was clearly a formality. Vanessa's face went white. "This is a mistake. I have rights. I want my lawyer." "You'll have access to legal counsel at the station," the officer replied, producing handcuffs. "Vanessa Lawson, you are under arrest for elder financial abuse, fraud, and theft. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." The click of the handcuffs closing around her wrists was the most satisfying sound I had heard in years. As they led her toward the door, she twisted to look back at Lucas one final time, and all pretense of love or regret vanished from her features. "You'll regret this," she screamed, her voice cracking with venom. "You're nothing without me, Lucas. Nothing. You think your precious daddy will save you? You're not even his real son." Lucas flinched, but did not look away. "I know exactly who I am now," he said quietly. "And I know exactly who you are. That's the difference between us." The officers pulled her through the door, and her screams faded down the hallway until they disappeared entirely. The silence that followed Vanessa's removal felt sacred, like the hush inside a church after the congregation has departed. Lucas stood motionless by the window, staring at the parking lot below where police cars still flashed their lights. I wanted to go to him, to offer comfort, but something told me he needed a moment alone with his shattered reality. Grace cleared her throat softly. "There's one more thing," she said, reaching into her briefcase with an expression that suggested she had been waiting for this moment since we first gathered in this room. "Eleanor left specific instructions. This envelope was only to be opened after Vanessa was arrested." She held up a cream-colored envelope, thicker than the others, with Eleanor's handwriting clearly visible on the front. The words read, "For my family, when justice has been served." My hands trembled as Grace placed the envelope in my palm. The paper felt warm, as if Eleanor herself had just finished sealing it. I broke the wax seal and withdrew several pages of her careful handwriting. Each line precise and deliberate, despite the illness that must have been ravaging her body when she wrote them. I began to read aloud, my voice unsteady but determined. Lucas turned from the window to listen, and even Dr. Green leaned forward. "My dearest Martin and Lucas," the letter began. "If Grace has given you this envelope, then Vanessa has finally faced the consequences of her actions. I want you to understand everything I did, and why I did it. You deserve the complete truth." I paused to steady my breathing. I discovered Vanessa's theft 3 months before I died. It happened during one of my better days, when the pain medication allowed me to think clearly for a few hours. I was reviewing our accounts, trying to organize our finances so Martin would not be burdened after I was gone, when I noticed the discrepancies. Small withdrawals, carefully spaced, designed to avoid detection. The work of someone who had studied our accounts carefully and knew exactly how to exploit them. Lucas made a sound like a wounded animal, but I pressed on. My first instinct was to confront her immediately, to expose her crime and protect our family. But then I thought about what would happen next. Vanessa would deny everything. She would manipulate Lucas into defending her, just as she had manipulated him into doubting his own father. She would claim the withdrawals were authorized, that I had agreed to them during moments of confusion. It would become her word against mine, and I knew I would not live long enough to see the case through court. Eleanor's voice seemed to echo in my mind as I read her words. Her logic as sharp and clear as it had been in life. So, I made a different choice. I let her continue stealing. Every dollar she took became another piece of evidence. Every visit she made to Grace's office, pretending to help with estate planning while actually searching for information, was documented and recorded. I gave her enough rope to hang herself, and I knew that eventually, she would tie the noose around her own neck. Grace nodded solemnly, confirming what the letter described. She had been part of this plan from the beginning, Eleanor's trusted ally in a war fought from a hospital bed. I knew Vanessa would not stop at theft. The letter continued. Her ultimate goal was always the inheritance, and I knew she would eventually try to remove Martin from the equation entirely. The adoption was her weapon of choice, the secret she had discovered years ago and kept hidden until she needed it. I could see it coming as clearly as I could see the cancer consuming my body. My vision blurred with tears, but I forced myself to keep reading. So, I built a trap. The DNA test would be the trigger, the event that would set everything in motion. I knew Vanessa would push for it eventually, believing it would disinherit Martin and give her full control over Lucas's share. But I wrote the will clauses to turn her own attack against her. The moment she formally challenged Martin's paternal rights, she forfeited her inheritance claims. The moment she triggered the investigation, all the evidence of her theft would come to light. I had to stop. The words swam before my eyes as the full scope of Eleanor's planning became clear. She had spent her dying months not succumbing to despair, but engineering justice. She had transformed her own mortality into a shield that would protect her family long after she was gone. The DNA test was the trigger. I read, my voice breaking. The will clause was the lock. And this letter is the key. Together they form a trap that Vanessa built for herself. Brick by brick, theft by theft, lie by lie. I simply made sure the walls were high enough that she could never climb out. Lucas crossed the room and stood beside me, reading over my shoulder. Tears streamed down his face as he saw his mother's final message. Martin, my love, if you are reading this, then you have won. Justice has been served, and our family is safe. But winning is not enough. Now you must heal. Eleanor's handwriting grew slightly less steady in the final paragraphs. Forgive Lucas. He was also her victim, perhaps even more than you. She manipulated him from the day they met, twisted his love into a weapon against his own father. He will need time to recover, and he will need you to show him what real family looks like. Be patient with him. He is still your son, and he always will be. I reached for Lucas's hand and held it tightly as I read the final lines. Find happiness again, Martin. That is my final wish. Do not spend the rest of your life mourning what we lost. Honor what we built. Live fully. Love deeply. And remember that I will be watching over you always. The letter was signed with Eleanor's name, but beneath her signature was a postscript that made my heart skip. P.S. Grace has one more envelope. Do not open it today. Open it when you are ready to live again. You will know when that time has come. Trust yourself, my love, and trust that even in death, I am still taking care of you. I looked at Grace through my tears, and she nodded, patting her briefcase gently. Whenever you are ready, Martin. She made me promise to keep it safe until you asked for it. The trial took place 6 weeks later. I sat in the front row with Lucas beside me, both of us dressed in our best suits, united for the first time in years against a common enemy. Vanessa sat at the defense table in an orange jumpsuit. She had aged visibly. Her attorney, a harried-looking man, shuffled papers with the resigned air of someone who knew he was fighting a losing battle. The charges were read aloud: elder financial abuse, fraud, inheritance fraud, conspiracy. Each count painted a portrait of calculated cruelty. But the true spectacle came when Patricia Hartwell was brought in to testify. Vanessa's mother had been arrested 2 weeks after her daughter, caught trying to withdraw funds from the secondary account. She shuffled to the witness stand in her own orange jumpsuit, her once imperious bearing reduced to the hunched posture of a woman who had finally run out of schemes. The prosecutor's questions were surgical and precise. Patricia squirmed. I had nothing to do with any of this, she insisted, her voice climbing to a desperate pitch. Vanessa acted alone. She planned everything herself. I was just a mother trying to help her daughter manage some finances. I had no idea where that money came from. From the defense table, Vanessa's head snapped up. For a moment, mother and daughter locked eyes, and I witnessed something I had never expected to see. Vanessa's expression shifted from desperation to pure, unfiltered disgust. You taught me everything, Vanessa said, loud enough for the entire courtroom to hear, despite her attorney's frantic attempts to silence her. You pointed me at that family like a weapon. You told me exactly what to do and how to do it. And now you're going to sit there and pretend you were innocent? The judge called for order, but the damage was done. Patricia's carefully constructed defense crumbled as her own daughter confirmed her involvement. The manipulator had been abandoned by her protégé, betrayed by the very tactics she had taught. When the time came for victim statements, the prosecutor called my name. I rose slowly, feeling the weight of every eye, and made my way to the podium. I had written and rewritten my statement a dozen times. In the end, I spoke from the heart. Your Honor, I began, my voice steady despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm me. I stand before you not as a man seeking revenge. Revenge is for those who have nothing left to lose. And despite everything that has happened, I still have my son. I still have my memories of my wife. I still have the life we built together over 44 years of marriage. I paused. What I seek is restoration. Justice is not about punishment for its own sake. It is about setting things right. About ensuring that those who prey upon the vulnerable cannot continue to do so. My wife, Eleanor, understood this. Even as she was dying, she worked to protect our family from those who would exploit us. She believed in justice, not vengeance, and I honor her memory by believing the same. I looked directly at Vanessa for the first time since taking the stand. I hope that someday you find whatever peace is available to you. But I also hope that you spend every day of your sentence remembering that the woman you tried to rob, and the family you tried to destroy, were stronger than your schemes. Eleanor saw you clearly when no one else did, and in the end, truth won. I returned to my seat as the judge began her sentencing remarks. Vanessa received 7 years, with a possibility of parole after 5 for good behavior. Patricia received 4 years as an accomplice. As the bailiffs moved to escort them, I saw tears streaming down Vanessa's face for the first time since this nightmare began. But I knew those tears were not from remorse. They were the tears of someone who had lost everything she had schemed to obtain. I had it all planned perfectly, she whispered as they led her past our row. How did she know? How did that dying old woman see everything before it happened? I did not answer. Some questions carry their own responses. Outside the courthouse, the air was crisp and clean, a welcome relief. I stood on the steps, breathing deeply. Lucas appeared beside me, his face pale but determined. Dad, he said quietly, his voice cracked. Can you ever forgive me for what I did? For all those years I chose her side over yours? I looked at my son, his eyes red from tears, his shoulders carrying the weight of guilt. The autumn wind stirred the fallen leaves. For a moment, I saw the little boy I had raised, the child who used to run into my arms after school. The young man who had slowly been stolen from me by a woman who never deserved him. Let's go home, I said. There's something I want to show you. We drove in silence to the house where Lucas had grown up, the house where Eleanor had created a life filled with love and laughter, and the quiet strength that had protected us even after her death. I led him through the back gate to the garden she had tended with such devotion. The flower beds now dormant, but still beautiful in their autumn rest. We sat on the wooden bench Eleanor had chosen for this exact spot, positioned to catch the afternoon sun and overlook the roses she had planted when Lucas was still young enough to help her dig in the dirt. Tell me about her, Lucas said quietly. My birth mother, Sarah. I need to know who she was. I closed my eyes and let the memories surface, images I had carried for nearly 4 decades. Sarah was Eleanor's roommate in college. They were closer than sisters. She was brave, Lucas. Braver than anyone I've ever known. When she got sick, when the doctors told her there was nothing more they could do, she didn't waste her remaining time on self-pity or fear. Lucas listened with his whole body. She loved you more than life itself. You were only 3 when she was diagnosed, and she spent every moment she had left making sure you would be taken care of. She asked Eleanor to raise you, to give you the home and the family she knew she couldn't provide. And when Eleanor brought you to us, when I held you for the first time, I knew that Sarah had given us the greatest gift anyone could ever receive. My voice broke, but I pressed on. We didn't adopt you out of obligation, Lucas. We adopted you because the moment we saw you, we loved you. You became our son not through paperwork or legal proceedings, but through the choice we made every single day to put your needs before our own. That's what family means. That's what Sarah wanted for you. Lucas buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking with sobs that seemed to come from somewhere deep and long suppressed. I wasted so many years, he choked out. Doubting you, following her orders, treating you like an enemy when you were the only real parent I ever had. I'm so sorry, Dad. I'm so sorry for everything. I put my arm around him and pulled him close, the way I had done when he was small and frightened of the dark. Forgiveness is a journey, Lucas, not a destination. We'll walk it together, one step at a time. What matters now is that we're here, that we found our way back to each other. Your mother would be proud of you for having the courage to face the truth. We sat together until the sun began to set, talking about everything and nothing, rebuilding the bridge that Vanessa had tried so hard to destroy. Lucas told me he had already filed for divorce, that he needed to find out who he really was before he could become the son he wanted to be. I've spent 10 years being who she wanted me to be, he said. Now I need to figure out who I actually am. Maybe then I can become someone worthy of the sacrifice you and Mom made for me. That evening, after Lucas had gone home to begin the long process of dismantling his old life, I remembered the final envelope Grace had mentioned. I found it in my desk drawer, where I had placed it weeks ago, waiting for the right moment. The handwriting on the front was Eleanor's. For Martin, on the day you're ready to live again. I sat in my armchair, the same chair where I had read so many of her letters, and took a deep breath. The paper felt warm in my hands. I opened it. Eleanor's handwriting filled 3 pages, each word a gift from beyond the veil. I read slowly, savoring every sentence, letting her voice wash over me one final time. My dearest Martin, the letter began. If you are reading this, then you have survived the storm I saw coming long before the first clouds appeared on the horizon. You have faced betrayal, fought for justice, and emerged with your dignity intact. I am so proud of you, my love. I always knew you were stronger than you believed yourself to be. I had to stop and wipe my eyes before continuing. Even now, months after her death, Eleanor's faith in me felt like sunlight breaking through winter clouds. I'm sorry I couldn't protect you in person. I'm sorry I had to leave you to face this battle alone, but I hope my preparations kept you safe. I hope the traps I built and the evidence I gathered gave you the weapons you needed to defeat those who wish you harm. Every hour I spent planning, every document I hid, every instruction I left with Grace was an act of love. It was the only way I knew to hold your hand from beyond the grave. The letter continued with practical matters, explaining where she had hidden additional documents, which accounts held emergency funds, how to contact people who could help if new threats emerged. Eleanor had thought of everything, planned for every contingency, left nothing to chance. But it was the final paragraphs that broke me completely. Now that the storm has passed, I have one more request. Use what I've left to build something beautiful. Our story does not have to end with pain and betrayal. It can become a shield for others who face what you faced. A beacon for those lost in the darkness of exploitation and abuse. There are so many elderly people in this world who have no one to protect them. No one to see the predator circling before it's too late. Help them, Martin. Let our story become their salvation. I set the letter down and looked around the empty room, feeling the weight of her words settling into my bones. And Martin, she had written in her final lines, don't spend forever alone. You and Linda. I've watched you over the years, seen the way she looks at you when she thinks no one is watching. She sees you for who you truly are, not for what you have or what you've lost. When you're ready, let her in. I want you to be happy, my love. That has always been my greatest wish. 1 year later, I stood at the ribbon-cutting ceremony for Eleanor's Shield Foundation, a non-profit organization dedicated to protecting elderly victims of financial abuse. The building was modest, but welcoming, a converted storefront where people could walk in without appointment and find help without judgment. Grace Whitford served on the board. Dr. Green had agreed to provide pro bono consultations. And Lucas stood beside me, his hands steady as he helped me cut the ceremonial ribbon. My son had changed. The divorce had been finalized quickly, and he had thrown himself into therapy with the same determination he had once devoted to pleasing his manipulative wife. He volunteered at the foundation 3 days a week, listening to the stories of people who had experienced betrayal similar to his own. I understand them. He told me once. I know what it feels like to be manipulated by someone you love, to wake up one day and realize that everything you believed was a lie. If I can help even one person avoid what happened to me, then maybe something good came out of all that pain. Watching him heal was its own form of miracle. The morning after the foundation's grand opening, I sat on my porch with a cup of coffee, watching the sunrise paint the sky in shades of gold and pink. The garden Eleanor had planted was blooming again, the roses flourishing under my amateur attention and Linda's expert guidance. Linda herself sat in the chair beside me, her silver hair catching the early light, her presence as comfortable and natural as breathing. We had grown closer over the past year, our friendship deepening into something neither of us had expected, but both of us welcomed. She never tried to replace Eleanor. She simply walked beside me as I learned to live again. It's beautiful, she said, nodding toward the garden. Eleanor would be pleased. I smiled, feeling a warmth in my chest that had nothing to do with the coffee. She's still taking care of us, even now, even after everything. I can feel her watching over this family. Linda reached over and squeezed my hand, a gesture of understanding that required no words. Later that morning, Lucas would arrive to help me sort through donation requests. Grace would call with updates on legal cases. Life would continue in all its messy, complicated, beautiful chaos. But in that quiet moment on the porch, with the woman who had become my closest friend beside me and the garden my wife had planted blooming before us, I finally understood what Eleanor had been trying to tell me all along. I looked at her photograph on the side table, the one from our wedding day, and felt tears prick my eyes. But they were not tears of grief. They were tears of gratitude. Blood doesn't make family. Choice does. And I choose to live for her, for Lucas, and finally for myself. The sun continued to rise over Eleanor's garden, and somewhere in the light and the flowers and the gentle morning breeze I could have sworn I heard her laughing. And so, my friends, that's the story of how my son, my flesh and blood, tried to erase me, and how my wife, even from beyond the grave, saved us all. It reminds us that family isn't just about biology or inheritance. It's about the choices we make every single day, the sacrifices we offer, and the courage to stand firm when others try to tear us down. What do you think? Have you ever faced betrayal from someone you thought was family? Or perhaps you've experienced the power of chosen family? Tell me your thoughts in the comments below. I really want to hear from you.